This is Through the Rear View, a podcast from Three Aspens Media. I'm your host, Lindsay Young. On this show, we look back with the leaders, innovators, and storytellers who have helped shape their industries. We unpack the lessons they've learned, the pivots they've made, and the legacies they've built. It's a chance to reflect, reconnect, and get a view of what really matters. Enjoy. Joe Nettemeyer's story isn't about a straight line to the top. It's about endurance over ego, learning over certainty, people over systems. He grew up in a working class family, watching his parents work relentlessly, a lesson that shaped how he would lead for decades. When he stepped into the CEO role at Valin, a provider of automation, fluid management, precision management, process heating, and filtration products, it wasn't because he felt ready. In fact, he'll tell you he didn't. And the timing couldn't have been worse. The dot-com crash, 9/11, both testing not just the business, but the person leading it. But Joe stayed when it would have been easier to lead. He led through uncertainty, believed deeply in employee ownership, and learned that technology doesn't change companies, people do. After more than 50 years in business, he'll tell you the people issues never go away. Today, with his daughter now leading the company and Joe retired officially, he looks back not with nostalgia, but with perspective. And I'm honored he's sharing that with me today. Thanks for joining me, Joe.
It's a pleasure to be here, Lindsay. Thanks for inviting me to participate in this.
Yeah, thank you for being willing to share your experience with our audience. So you've talked a lot about growing up in a working class family. You grew up watching your parents work really hard. Can you tell me a little bit about your early years and how those shaped you?
My mother and father were Depression era kids. They grew up on a farm, and both of them on a farm in Southern Illinois in the 1930s, and they had to work. They had to work to survive. The good news for them was that since they were on a farm, they grew their own food, and they didn't starve. But there was no extra money for the things that we spend money on today. My mother's education ended in sixth grade. Her work was more important on the farm than an education at that point. And my father's work and his education ended in eighth grade. Same thing. They needed him on the farm. That they were still plowing fields with teams of mules and horses, and every day was, before sunrise to sunset, just a lot of hard work. And I remember my mother telling me that her big Christmas gift every year was a new pair of shoes. And the shoes she had received from the Christmas before became everyday shoes to go to school with. And if her feet had grown, they'd cut out the toes of the shoes so she could keep walking with those shoes. And like discretionary money, she liked buying shoes. But she
Makes sense.
she didn't see that as a bad thing. That was just life. And that's what I think my parents taught me is not everything is upside. There's downsides, and you have to learn how to deal with life. And they're really good examples. They both worked. My dad was a bus driver. After he was a sergeant in the Army in World War II, and was in a mechanized infantry battalion that was part of Patton's Third Army. So he was in the push to break through the Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, and then they turned the unit and swung south and went into Germany later. He came back, and he was ready to settle down, and he didn't want to farm anymore because he got tired of mules and horses. I spent a lot of time out at the farm because my parents still went out and helped. And, we went through life and we were a working class family. We had enough, we never missed a meal, and I never felt poor, but I think our wealth was defined by by our extended family and the relationships we had. My mother was one of 9 children. My dad was one of 4, and I had 47 first cousins. Uh,
Wow, that's a lot.
you know, we gathered quite a bit. It seemed like, I'm not sure it was, but it seemed like every weekend we went out to Germantown, Illinois, which is about 50 miles east of St. Louis, uh, to spend the weekends with our grandmothers. I wouldn't have traded that experience for anything else in my life. It gave me a foundation that I knew it gave me a foundation that identified what's important, not what's superfluous. And I was very pleased to be able to say that I got educated and nurtured the right way.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, what was the path to Valence?
St. Louis University in 1973, and we were in the midst of a what at that time was called the Arab oil embargo, and we had the first recession in the United States technically since 1958. And I had grown up, I didn't know what a recession was, but trying to find a job was very difficult. And I had been working at a grocery chain's warehouse part-time while I was going to college. And I just kept working there until it took me about 6 months to land a job. And I started working for an electrical contractor in St. Louis, who's still a very large electrical contractor. And they were doing a lot of business with Anheuser-Busch and Monsanto and other companies throughout the United States. And I got a fancy title. I was called an assistant project manager, but I always laugh and say the job description was, you were the gopher. Go for this, go for that. My job was to make sure that the electricians weren't sitting around waiting for parts. And I got a crash course in problem solving. And I think that served me well throughout my career. It helped me learn how to make decisions quickly and expeditiously, because you can't sit there and stall. There's nothing worse than having the president of the company saying, I got 6 guys over there on the clock waiting for this small part to show up. What the heck are you doing? And I didn't ever want to get those calls. So I did that. And then I got recruited away from them by a company in St. Louis called Alvey. And I went from they brought me in, and I started as a buyer, and then they put me in charge of the purchasing group and the production scheduling group. And I was about 20. I'd just gotten married. I was 25 years old. And they wanted to install what we at that time called a material requirements planning system, an MRP system, which is
Sure.
now the ERP. And at that point, I think I was the only guy in the room. I joke about this place. I'm the only one guy in the room that could spell computer, but and that was pretty challenging. Yeah, I learned a valuable lesson about software, especially software companies. They can describe all the wonders, but they never make it you aware of what the challenges are going to be, because their software was always incomplete, so to speak. So yeah, I did that, and we were installing that system, and Emerson was always renowned for being extremely good at managing operations. And they hired two retired Emerson executives to help them with this. And I was working with them, and they were um, they were helping me translate from okay, how do we take this manual structure and convert it into an electronic structure. And over time, then one day they came up, and Emerson had started a program for what they called high potential hires. And what it became was a program where they'd hire people who they thought were high potential, who they then were sending up to Northwestern University, who was in the early stages of developing their executive MBA program. And we would go up as a group and work on cases. And the cases they took were, for our group, were Emerson division cases. And they thought I was be an excellent candidate to be in that program, and they recruited me and hired me in 1979. Started in a division and went from a district sales manager to regional sales manager, was then promoted and sent to a division in Atlanta, Georgia, as the vice president of sales and marketing. And I did some things that were not, you didn't get out of a textbook, you had to get creative. And with that work came to the attention of the then president of the corporation, and they needed to fix this division, and they formed a team of young high potential individuals, and they sent us down there, and margins kept dropping and dropping, and they had gone from being a 20% pre-tax company down to losing $300,000. And we turned that around. We got it growing again, and we increased sales 40%, and we returned it to its high point of profitability. And another
Amazing.
company was interested in buying it, so we sold it.
Amazing.
They sent me to Indianapolis. They had taken a stake in a company. They were building up their factory automation portfolio, and they were looking at this. They'd taken a stake in this corporation that built custom high-speed parts feeding vibratory bowls, I would call them. And they wanted to make a decision. Either they were going to make a full acquisition and buy out the owner, or they were going to divest. And I told our people in St. Louis, we don't want to buy this business. It's not a bad business, but it's all custom work and it's not scalable because you need skilled tool and die makers. And they came in and told the owner that, and he got a little upset and lunged across the table at me. And the Emerson guy said, "Well, I don't think you need to be here." So I spent a couple of months in Indianapolis, and then they transferred me to Pittsburgh, where I became the executive vice president of sales and marketing for a company called Chromalox, which manufactured electric heating equipment. And one of the big challenges I had there was we worked through manufacturers' reps, and about 2/3 of our reps were at or going to be at retirement age within 5 years. And I had to work with them to develop succession plans or find another representative organization. And, we got through that pretty well. And in the course of that, I met the CEO of Valin because I had made a transition in California with our existing rep organization. Valin took over as the rep for Chromalox in California, and that's how we got to know each other. He called me at the end of 2000 and wanted to meet with me. And I flew out to have a meeting with him, and he sat down and he says, we've been looking for my successor now for about 18 months, and we just haven't found the right fit. And I spoke with our executive recruiting firm, and they gave me a profile of someone who might fit the role, who would have the best experience. And he goes, "I've gone through that, and I went through a list of names, and you, in my mind, are the top candidate."
Wow. Did that surprise you?
Yeah, and I didn't know what to say. It was one of those out of the blue that you just weren't prepared for. And my wife and I, we were Midwesterners and lived in the South and the Northeast, and we never ever thought about the fact that we might live in California. It just seemed too far away. It was announced on my birthday, and my 50th birthday in 2001, that I was becoming this new CEO at Valin at Valin's headquarters in Sunnyvale. And little did I know what was coming at me. I felt prepared to do the job, but I wasn't, and I don't think anyone was totally prepared to deal with the challenges that were thrust upon us. I'd been accustomed to dealing with down markets, but when the dot-com crash occurred, 65% of our business dried up. We were probably about 90% in the semi industry, and capital investment just ground to a halt.
Right. So this was 2019 or 2020, or not 2019?
This was 2001.
Right? And
2001.
It started in 2001. Okay.
Yeah.
Which I think most people who are listening also know what else happened that year, which was 9/11. So it was
Well,
pretty
9/11 hadn't
challenging
happened yet.
year, yeah, to start as the leader of a company.
So I had a shift. I came in with a plan on how to grow the business. And I had to, within 90 days, I had to start cutting heads. And because
Oh,
we had to survive. And we had to take our workforce down from 103 to 48.
wow, so half.
Yeah. And I would say I consider that one of the I knew what to do. I didn't have one moment of feeling good about it. And that was probably one of the lower points of my working career. I couldn't come up with a solution other than to have to do that, because if we didn't do it, we were going to go out of business. Uh, yeah,
Mhm.
we we moved there in July, beginning of July of 2001. And about 6 weeks later, I came home and told my wife I had to take a 20% pay cut.
No.
And she was stunned, but we took it in stride, and we'd always managed to live below our means. Then 9/11 came, and it was like, now through that, I was trying to develop what's our new strategy. I knew we had to diversify. I knew I had to not be almost 100% in one industry. And I had worked out a deal to acquire the Chromalox rep offices in the Northwest. That was our first acquisition. We began consolidating distributors, and we acquired 46 companies prior to the sale to Graybar. And since then, Valin's acquired 3 more. We became very good at acquiring and integrating companies into our business. And that got us diversified. That got our revenues from semi down to less than 50%. We still wanted to be there. We just didn't want the semi investment cycle is sharp peaks and deep valleys. It's like a shark tooth pattern, and it's really hard to run a business when you're either hyper accelerating or crashing. And
Yeah.
now it's a balanced business. We've diversified and built around our core portfolio, and we developed a strategy of providing technical services, because I saw the value. It was moving somewhere else in the decision making matrix, and it wasn't on product. It was on the knowledge you had on how to utilize that product to improve your processes. And I was prepared by Emerson to deal with tough times, but I wasn't prepared to deal with the depth of tough times we experienced back then.
Yeah, it was really a black swan event. How quickly did you guys sit down and shift gears and say, we need to do something so that, you know, our company can survive this period?
Well, the first part, we had to reduce our costs,
Yeah. We had to do
and
the
uh, and we
stuff.
did that, and that we started in August, and we had the head count down by early January. I didn't make any cuts in December. I just didn't have it in me to do that. Uh,
Smart.
but after we made our final cuts, and what was hard about it is we had to let go of good people. They weren't bad people. They weren't bad performers. We just didn't have enough revenue to support all the headcount. And that was very frustrating for me. It was necessary. And I think that's what Emerson trained us. You can have all the ideas you want, but you always have to do the necessary things. And I was going out and having lunches and discussions with people. And one individual mentioned the other night, I started developing a new strategy, sketching it out on paper napkins at restaurants over lunch, because lunch was my time to think without dealing with crises. And I have no one. He was one individual remembered that, and we call it the napkin strategies.
Nice.
And that's how we kind of pieced it together, because I, when you're in the middle of a business crises, your days are just consumed by the crises. And then we made another small acquisition in the beginning of 2003. Things started improving. In 2004, things solidified, and we acquired 3 businesses at the end of 2004, which laid the foundation for our diversification. And that was the turning point. I remember sitting at the NAW Executive Summit in January of 2007, and Alan Bolio, he said 2 things which kind of took me aback, but I listened. And one was, the country's going to go into a depression around 2030.
I remember that,
And
actually.
then he also said we would be in a hard recession in the fourth quarter of 2008. Emerson trained us to make data-driven decisions. I think that's what developed the toughness in me. When people came to me with opinions, I'd say, no, you got to show me the data. I took that input from Alan Bolio, and I immediately started conserving cash. And, he was dead on with the 2008 recession. Once again, we were strained, but we weren't losing money, and we had a lot of cash in the bank. And the people that had not managed their businesses well got in trouble, and we bought 5 businesses in 2009. Hard times for the country became opportunity for us in that cycle, because we were prepared. And that was the difference between 2001 and 2008. We were totally unprepared. And in 2008, we were prepared. And I give, Alan Bolio, applause for making me cognizant of what was on the horizon. That was the difference between those 2 periods of crises.
Yeah.
Being unprepared and saying, what the heck am I going to do now? And being prepared and knowing what you wanted to do. And what was also interesting in that was I had credibility with our long-term people. One thing that Kathy Mazzarella and I, we both have a very, very strong commitment to running an employee-owned business. And we both see the value in, 80% of the value of a company is created by the people working for it.
Yeah.
And I think they should share in the gains. And that's the gray bar philosophy. And I think it's culturally, it was the right place to go.
Hey, Joe, was Valin employee owned when you joined Valin, or is that something that you transitioned to over time? And if so, why?
Began the employee ownership in 1988. One of the founders, they spun off a business, and one of the founders had to be bought out. And about 30% of the shares went into the ESOP and farmed the ESOP. When I came in, the other founder had been selling his shares back. And in 2001, the ESOP had 70% of the shares as I was taking over. The ESOP bought his shares. He decided to take the company to 100% ESOP and convert from a C Corp to an S Corp. And we needed that money to, if we wanted to sustain a acquisition strategy and still meet our redemption obligations every year, we needed to free up cash, and that's how we did it. You know, tomorrow was always going to bring more revenue and more sales, and they'd borrow money against it, and then they got into trouble. And I refused to let that happen. So we became 100% ESOP at the end of 2007.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier in some of your earlier part of your career where you were kind of looked upon as the guy who knew the only one who knew how to spell computers. So you've kind of kept that throughout your career. So you've adopted technology across, multiple eras. So early reporting systems, modern analytics, other tools. And I would love your perspective on kind of, maybe mistakes you see leaders making today or that you've seen over the years in buying technology, because buying technology obviously isn't the same as changing behavior, right? I really want your perspective on the role of technology in growing a business and, when it works, when it doesn't work.
If you're going to adopt the technology, you got to have people in your organization that understand it. And I think a lot of organizations buy the software and everybody's looking at each other going, what do we do with this?
Yeah.
And, the leadership here is a great sales pitch, but they really don't have anyone that has relevant experience in adopting and implementing that technology. And you got to make sure you got those types of individuals on board before the fact, not after the fact. Otherwise, you become a slave to consultants who charge you a lot every month to implement it. And they don't move at light speed because they like that monthly charge. And you stump. And you got to organize key teams around implementing different stages. You just don't walk in and say, we're putting this on and everything's going to be done in the first month. You got to do it incrementally, and you got to make sure that you're providing the data links that will allow you to bring the next module in, so to speak. And you have to, I think in the beginning, you got to say, if we put this in, what's the most important module that we have to focus on? You can't focus on 10. You got to focus on the most important.
Minimum. Mm-hmm.
For me, it was always having our assets in distribution. Our hard assets are inventory and receivables. Well, we better have control of that all the time. And some people get enamored with, we'll do this thing in sales first. No. And you have control of your hard assets. And then you bring on the other modules or bolt-ons to enhance the experience for the whole organization. To add to the confusion, in 2001, we had made a conversion. They made a conversion in February before I arrived to a new generation of software, and I couldn't pull a report out of it when I got there in April or May. So I'm sitting down there with the accountants every week, putting things together, trying to understand what was happening to the business. And that was a dimension of crises of that we, it was kind of like, okay, let's shoot ourselves in the foot on top of all the rest. I had our IT people give me a list of what are the 10 things we need to get done to make this work. And they gave it to me, and the software provider said, well, you'll get the next one in you'll get these answered in our .1 upgrade, which will come in February or March of next year. And the other one will come in the .2 upgrade that'll come in October. And I said, I looked at the CEO and said, guess what? If we have to wait that long, we might be out of business and you won't get a nickel. And by the way, I'm going to sue you for impairing the business. And I had a weekly call with our IT people in their company, going through that checklist. Okay, get number 1 done. Okay, get number 2 done. Get number 3. And we walked down that list, and I'd say we got 5 out of the 10 things we've needed and the most critical things, the top 5, in the first 6 months. And then we got the second 5 in the next 6 months. And, we could run our business and make informed decisions. My point is before you make a change, you got to understand what your capabilities are.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to have an honest assessment of what the downside risks are of especially disrupting the experience of the customer. And customers today, they don't stick around long if you're going to keep giving them heartburn. So that was a telling experience. And we've taken our group has taken that incremental approach ever since, probably around 2009, 2010. We took away all pricing authority from salespeople because they're not price authorities.
Mm-hmm.
If they can give another 10% to get an order, they just give it, and they give it probably 90% of the time when they don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
So we had centralized control, and we put software in place to manage it. We had to effectively market products online. We had to normalize the database that our suppliers had provided us, and you would get things like let's say a 1-inch valve, because I can describe how they did it. And these companies, as they introduce product over decades, someone might have 1-inch spelled out, 1-inch valve. And then someone else would put the next one in as inch dash 1 inch. and then someone else would not spell out the word one. They'd put the numeral in there, 1 inch, or they would put 1-inch valve. And we had to standardize that. So we went through hundreds of thousands, of our major suppliers. We focused on other areas where we had to get higher accuracy and data integrity, and we would concentrate on them one at a time, because I always saw software initiatives, people would get 80% of the way there and they get frustrated and they were trying to get 5 things done 80% of the way there. And I said, let's get one thing done 100%. And we picked them off. And we had to develop that in-house patience and practical approach. I think that's a blind spot in management. Management wants everything done in 6 months. In that world, and when you're managing data, it doesn't happen that way.
Joe, your daughter runs the business now, right?
She's the president.
Yeah, she's the president. How does that make you feel? She's kind of followed in your footsteps.
Anne is an instinctual leader. When she was in high school, she was the president of the student council. When she was on the swim team, she was a captain of the swim team. She was on the tennis team. She was the captain of the swim team, or the tennis team, excuse me. She went to college. She was the president of her sorority. People put a lot of trust and confidence in her. And she has always done a good job. She wasn't one to occupy space. She wanted to do something. And when she graduated in 2001, she was going to school in North Carolina, and I flew out for her graduation, and then she and I packed up all of her the things she wanted to bring home in her Honda Civic, and we drove across country in the Honda Civic from North Carolina to California. And I will say this, this injects to my family. My mother, who had the 6th grade education, was at her graduation from college. And
that was beautiful.
My mother got to see all 4 of her granddaughters graduate from college.
Incredible. Amazing.
And those were just shining moments for her, because she saw the realization of her dream, that her granddaughters could have a better opportunity than she had. Anne was ready to go to work, and we said, well, come to Valin. And well, when we hired new people back then, we'd start them in the warehouse. She went through that progressive assignments for a year, and then ended up in marketing. She led the charge of normalizing data. She's been with the company since 2001, so she's been there 25 years. She knows the company, and she knows the people.
To your tenure. Okay.
We had invested a lot of money in our employees. We had 18 master's degrees that we paid for while in my tenure. 14 of them were masters in industrial distribution at Texas A&M. And I was trying to identify then who could be the next leadership team. And unfortunately, what you find out is there are some people that are good at accumulating credentials, but they're not very good at using them, using the skills. And there are others that are very good. And out of that investment emerged the next generation of management. We turned the company over to Anne and the team about the time we were entering into full-blown negotiations with Graybar. And she's done a great job. and she's dealing with different challenges, and I think she's doing a better job. There's some challenges they have now that I'm scratching my head going, how the heck do we fix this? I would say she has the best of both of us in her.
That's great. You must be so proud. Joe, there's a few questions that I like to ask everyone who comes on this podcast. And I think I want to get into those now because they're kind of related to what you were just talking about. You know, bringing up the next generation. So if you could go back and give advice to yourself when you were just starting this, when you were just starting out in this industry, what would that advice be?
I've sat on both sides, the manufacturing side and the distribution side of this industry. What played to my advantage was I was always hungry for knowledge. I'd always ask myself, what new value proposition can we bring to the marketplace that would distinguish us from the competition? And I see a lot of blindness to that in the industry. I felt for me it was a competitive advantage. Um, all the people they said it in a positive context. Said when you dealt with Joe, he was very intimidating, and I never sought to intimidate people, but I wish I had been a little more cognizant of it uh, earlier on. But that was when I had to get something done, I'd look you square in the eye and say, you know, tell me why I need to do this. And
You were very direct.
yeah, because I think and in today's world, I think there's a lot of dancing around, so to speak. People want to talk about the issue. They don't want to deal with the issue. And you got to deal with the issue. There were times I could get pretty sharp with people, and I should have recognized that. But you know, it, the really good ones, the really good team members took my challenges as an opportunity to grow. The ones that wanted to occupy the title and collect a paycheck, but then with the responsibility, they kind of withered and died. And if somebody wasn't cutting it, I just would I'd give them several opportunities, and if they didn't want to step up, we made the investment to develop a skill set, and then I wanted to see them apply the skill set, and some did, and some did. But I would probably say, yeah, I grew up with a combat infantry army sergeant as my father. There was no nonsense, and I believe I had inherited that or assimilated that no nonsense approach to dealing with things.
So, what's one thing about the old school way of doing business that you think still holds value today?
One thing is, I think you have to have integrity. And integrity isn't just a hollow word. It's reinforced by your actions, and you're going to have integrity as individuals, but more importantly, you got to have integrity as a corporation or as a company. If you say you're going to do something, do it. You don't make hollow promises. You gotta be constantly monitoring. Do we have integrity? Number one, do we have integrity with how we deal with all the constituencies? Do we have integrity with our employees? Do we have integrity with our suppliers? Do we have integrity with our customers? And do we have integrity in how we interact with the community which we operate in? And I would ask myself that question every year. We weren't perfect, but we strive to do the right thing. And there are companies that are not perfect that never strive to do the right thing. And I think over time that just chips away at your credibility in the marketplace. So I'm not sure I answered the question, but I think integrity is really I see integrity in decline across our nation for the last 20, situational integrity is not integrity.
I think that's the perfect answer to this question, actually, Joe. So thank you. And the final question, based on your experience, based on your knowledge, what do you think should excite the next generation of leaders?
I would say that what should excite them is the challenge. The last 25 years, we've been challenged by a number of things. Number one, the way people do business. The whole in 2001, we had the dot-com crash because Wall Street was hyping everything was going to change in 6 months. Well, people weren't ready to say, "Oh, heck, I'm going to quit going to my local grocery store and buy groceries online." And there were 3 startups in Silicon Valley when I got there that were all going to sell pet supplies online. And did you need 3? I don't think so. It was inevitable that people were going to transact progressively more and more online. They just weren't going to do it in 6 months. And now today, you watch shopping malls closing and retail establishments closing because it's much more convenient to sit here with your laptop or your phone and order something than it is get in your car, drive over there. So there's a challenge, and that was the challenge of my period. And one of the real challenges of the whole online experience was Amazon started getting traction and having success. And then every CFO wanted to be like Amazon. You go, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, we got to have ease of transaction, but they have such a wide breadth of product offering. You're never going to compete with them for attention.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to do it differently. And you got to be able to transact online, but you got to find how to create value in other ways on the internet. We spent a lot of time developing educational videos. One of our engineers did a lot of that through the COVID crises, and he was doing what we call a podcast today. Is building a library of them up about motion control.
You were ahead of you were ahead of the curve when it came to content.
we were which is one of our core competencies of helping customers, and he was sharing it with me, and I was scratching my head and going, why are we doing this? But I realized that we have a whole lot of engineers and technical people retiring, and we have new engineers that have textbook knowledge, but they don't have practical application knowledge. And we could provide value added of being the teachers of how to apply the product. And our people are still working on those things. They've got a lot of different ideas. But I think that was how we began looking at how we could innovate and use the internet as a technical knowledge transfer tool and establish ourselves as thought leaders in the spaces that we were competing in. That's the challenge. And I believe that's the opportunity for the management teams going forward is how are we going to take the tools we have and provide a better customer experience? Going online and putting your credit card in and they're telling you I'll ship in 2 days. That's an expectation now. That's not a differentiation. I find that exciting and challenging. But I always said, there's the 4 P's of marketing and then there's the 4 P's of the dumb. The 4 P's of the dumb are price, 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 and price. And that's their only differentiation. Well, that's not differentiation. That's just taking the easy way out.
Well, Joe, thank you.
Did I miss anything in that you wanted to?
No, you didn't miss anything at all. I want to thank you, though, for spending all this time with me and sharing your reflections and answering my questions about your life and career. So thank you so much for participating in this podcast.
Well, it's been my pleasure. I'm thankful that you felt I could contribute. And
Absolutely.
if I can do anything in the future, I'd be happy to.